Hello, beautifuls. Hello and welcome on this Friday, October 18th, day after the full moon of Aries. And we are here for a certain kind of conversation. We are here to explore the conditioning components that make up the seat that our ego sits in. So, first off, hi, my name is Rainey Ford of Mountain Moon Medicine. You are sitting here with me in my workspace, in my cave, and you will see that I am surrounded by all sorts of nuanced things, from plants that are hanging and drying to classes and courses and writings to herbal medicines, to all sorts of things drying and in various stages of being in their process of moving from a place of living outdoors to being in service in different ways, much like we're always learning and growing, right? We're it's kind of around here, it's all different reflections of very similar kinds of things. So here we're here for the conversation of things that involve, we're going to start with a concept around difficult conversations. Let's go there real quick. I'm going to say a few blunt statements, and I'd invite you to play along with me. It is in my perception that we are the kind of people that have a difficult time with difficult conversations. It's scary for us. It's intimidating. We don't know how to. It's bad things happen when I do. It's many varieties of reasons why. And the bottom line is that we tend to shy from difficult conversations. And we need to do something different. So here we're leaning into difficult conversations. Okay. So I'm gonna start off with that. So we're doing the like, so why? Why behind the behavior? Why behind the thought? Why behind that belief? What's sitting there? And what we're looking for is places and shapings of perspectives and beliefs and ways of being, behaviors, actions that are rooted in ways that are no longer serving to the directions that we're walking in, and or that are creating harm in front of us as we go. And that and or is really pivotal there, because we can be saying, oh, I'm fine on my end, I don't need to worry about what I'm getting out of the deal, while we might be completely unaware of the ripple effect of our beingness in the world. And if we don't care, wonderful, you're not here for the rest of this conversation, because that's not a thing you care about. If you care, then care in this way and in this place is where we're stepping into going, how can we take deep responsibility? Where can I find ways that, while it may not have been my fault that I am this way, I can find ways that it can play, that it can weave, that it can grow, that it can produce something that contributes in the direction where we are called. So that's the entry level, if you will, of our conversations here today, as we explore some of the conditioning components that we can understand from the ego side of things. Like so far, let's take a different stance. I'm going to come at it. There are many philosophers that have discussed different components around the shadow, around the piece of ourselves that looking for an entry point into this conversation that allows an ability to wrap ourselves in the many ways that this can show up inside of our various worlds. I'm going to go there before we dive into some of the piece parts around these 8 gates that we're playing with, that are like 8 archetypes of stepping into the ego conversation today. When we step into understanding that ego, this ego is a thing that both gives us that strength to have that ramrod straight spine that says, I'm going to come at things and I'm going to learn it, or I'm going to embrace it and do it even when it's hard. I'm going to step up and be responsible with resources. I am going to be responsible with my influence. I am going to be in relationship with what I can give, not what I think I can or should give. Right? I'm going to look at where I have people pleasing tendencies and see why. Ask why. Why are they there? The why behind our behaviors and our thinkings, the why and how it got there is part of where those shadow pieces, those ego, the ego being the part that is a thing that can be in our way. If we are so ramrod straight at certain times, that we cannot bend to walk through a short door, and we might not be able to go places that we need to go in order to have the kinds of connections that our soul might be here to have. So I'm staying vague in these conversations, inviting you to step in with what is the most real thing in your world. That might be a kind of relationship or a lack thereof. It might be a job or a lack thereof. It might be resources or lack thereof. It might be good connections to yourself and alone time or lack thereof. And for those of us who play with and study human design and gene keys, yes, I am absolutely lens stacking the gates of the will center and the ones that move through the channels as we play. So if you are a person who likes to play in those realms, I'm playing with the 4 centers, the 4 gates in the center of the will center. I would love to show you my screen just really briefly. Let me see how I can do this inside of, okay, gonna go right there. I want to spend most of my time with you today as opposed to being inside of shared screens the whole time, because this is such a deeply feeling and also a thing that is helpful if we can understand it mentally, and the connection I feel like might be helpful. So what we're looking at today is this image right here. And we're looking at the 4 gates in the will center, right? So that's that halfway point, the half gate that comes off of each of those 4 gates. And we're also looking at the other half of the gate that connects with the throat center, the G center, the splenic center, and the emotional solar plexus. And so if you have any gates defined in those spaces, and or those are bridging gates for you, most especially if you have connecting points that make up a channel with and because of someone else, if you have a dominant, if you have that channel and someone else has that channel, and therefore you have a dominance, as in a dual sovereignty that's coming in with different ways of being in that. There's so many ways to lens stack this for your own world. And I want to play less in that mechanics of it. That's kind of what Roots membership is for, where we apply the inner cartography into our own charts. Here I want to talk about the relational component of how these energies that are involved in these 8 gates, how they show up in our lived life and how we can find them as we're working with systems such as these. Okay. This here, and I'm happy to share this. This can get linked in the description. My team that might be on with me, if it's easeful and you can get this into the description, or we can do it right afterwards, that would be wonderful. This is the short level expression of these 8 gates that I'm going through, and I also have them lens stacked with just the ego gates, with the gene key side of human design, gene key astrology, the whole lineup of it from inside of the inner cartography matrix. So as I'm sitting with you, this is part of what I am pulling from and being with while I am speaking. So if you see my eyes starting to dart around the screen, know that I'm pulling and weaving as it's coming through and to here in this space with you all. All right, so I'm gonna come on out of this space, and hopefully that little moment of orientation helps to give a little bit of context when I'm speaking about things like energies that are like right up on that will center. And so I'm talking about the 4 that are right around inside that will center energy, you know, the 26, 51, 21, 40, those 4. And then that energy that's right around it that kind of like holds it into place, right? Sometimes we've got things that are like layered and stacked, right? So the control of gate 21 might be held there by the dominance of gate 45. It doesn't allow it to move back, and vice versa. Control can be held in place by dominance, and dominance can be held in place by a need to control or an inability to control. And so we dominate our world because we're not allowed to control it. And so we try to dominate anything and everyone that will allow us one iota of authority. So we end up in all these places of mismanaging our resources or not having enough resources, or right. And so we come to these deep questions of, okay, we're already starting to dive into those places. So let's go there. That was playing with 21. 21. I'd like to invite us into a space to become open to being receptive to what our truths have to say for ourselves. Please come at it that way. This is for the edification of your own sovereignty, not mine or anyone else's. And I invite you to feel into your body on a sensorial level. Okay, we're going to be playing with 2 things today, mental and emotional, like we did yesterday. Yesterday maybe was a little more mental, and today's a little more emotional. And we're going to be weaving back and forth between a mental and emotional, connecting that head and heart space. When we can have this torus, this infinity that connects both of these together, we get to have a deeper discernment that's based on what's true for us and how it makes sense to be able to apply it into our world, have an explanation for it, and stand by it no matter the cost. So we step into this practice of these 2 things simultaneously. I invite you to imagine, if you will, that inside the center of your being lies this deeply resoundedly playing drum. And this drum is playing inside of this very large round room. And that round room is the space for many things to be. It's a space where a part of you can run and hide. It's so loud, nobody can ever hear you. Crying or screaming, or just sitting in a corner. It's also the kind of room where our strength and our almost animalistic nature might go there to be at one with those beats, right? To find that primal boom, boom, right? That deep internal rhythm. You might also go to this room in order to connect with things that are more than us, whether that's praying to God, whether that is sitting in meditation, whether that is speaking to our ancestors, whether that is sitting in quiet stillness, listening to the thrum of our own heartbeat inside of our ears. Inside this room are many routes of ways that we get to explore. I invite you to feel into where in this kind of space the energy of both the value and essence of being alone and the expansion, contribution, possibilities that exist with connection and intimacy with friends and family and loved ones. And how these two opposites, right? Loneliness by myself, need to be alone, with community, with the other, drawn to in friendship and in loyalty. There's these two deeply connecting ways, because without the ability to be alone, the ability to be connected to the other may result in such a merge that we lose our own individuality. And so together, the two give the ability to push against each other, to hold a shape, to be this side of the bowl versus that side of the bowl. In this case, in the human design world, they are two pieces of a channel. They're a gate on either side. So together, when they're connected, they create a highway of energy. They allow the ability for energy to move through successfully. We move from loneliness and aloneness, self-determination, into relationship with community and family and friends and beloveds. And we move from those things smoothly into ourself, and we move back and forth through life in this balance. Now, at either end of the spectrum is also another set of spectrums, right? So let's go there for a second. On the spectrum of being, the lone side of things, we have a multiplicity of experiences. We have let's play 1 second real quick. In our draw, need, desire, and or thing that has been thrust upon us, in our aloneness or in our determination, our self-determination, right? We may be alone because we want it, need it. It's been thrust upon us. It's healthy for us, even if we don't like it. Maybe more. Those are at least four kind of like, it creates a room of experience where other things could live inside of. And inside of those ways of being, we could have a spectrum from, I don't need that kind of thing. I never need that. I don't need anything. It's contemptuous nature. It's reactive state. It could also be acquiescent, so much so that it either gives up its sovereignty or it gives up another's, right? It might not, it might push so hard and push through everything that it's needing to do that it has such, it's exhausted all of its possibilities. And so in that movement of being able to feel into how to move out of that reactiveness, finding that resolve gets one out of overly complying to the form, to the result of people pleasing, and overly sticking your chin out. This is the way it has to be, being almost insulting with one's words and one's assertiveness in their own self-protection. Sometimes we can be a little overly pushy ourselves when we feel like our boundaries have been pushed into. It is a natural response. It is also a thing we get to become responsible for. We get to see that we're doing that, and we get to take responsibility and be accountable to that. And that might look like saying, I'm sorry, I can see where I was reactive, or it was not my intention to be that way. I apologize for the results. And what that's doing is simply showing the other person that you see what you've done and perhaps some of its ripple effects. Oftentimes those things are a little bit like squirting a tube of toothpaste all over the table and then trying to shove it back in the tube. Sometimes it can feel a little hard to move past it. And that is also our work. Recognizing and realizing that we're not children that can hold, that need to hold on to hurts so much. Kind of feel like in my world, just to give a little glimpse of something, is that I'd like to think that we all have the ability to have a chance to do something better. And so I I leave the opportunity for that to be true with every person I engage with. I'm also not necessarily going to allow certain kinds of behaviors to continue inside of my world. Both of those things are very deeply true. And it took many years to come to that, of many years of bumping in and not having many boundaries, and then having boundaries so intense that I had nobody in my world because nobody was able to be, good enough. That's another part of the ego side of things. Finding those pieces inside of ourselves where we are so self-defensive around our own exhaustion, around our own limits, that we like shove things away that dare to push past our limits when maybe we didn't know how to speak about our limits to begin with. Maybe we didn't know how to speak about them in a way other than yelling or reactive or deeply emotional. People can have a hard time hearing through emotions, crying, just as much as they can have a hard time hearing them through yelling and screaming. It depends on so many factors, on a person's upbringing, on a person's energetic and emotional bandwidth. It also can have a lot to do with one's own, what was their conditioning like as they were growing up? Were they allowed to express and experience emotions? Were they shut down? Was there not space that was really safe for that? And also, what is their own neurodiversity in and amongst themselves outside of any sort of like, I mean, not that you can necessarily separate all of them. And I'm giving different lenses and layers of considerations because we can be born with a kind of nervous system expression which can be called all the so many things that you see all over that are labeled these days. And a lot of them are true. A lot of them they are very unique, different ways of being. Some are more socially acceptable or seen or known or understood more than others. All of these things can make and play a role inside of how it is that we come to an understanding of who we are and how we evolve and how we grow and change. And so as we look at seeing, what are some of our deepest layers of conditioning? So we were talking about the will center earlier. The will center, Richard Ra, the original founder of the system, talked about the will center being the ninth and most difficult to decondition center. So it was buried beneath all of the other layers of conditioning that existed inside of the chart, inside of the person's world. And so I'm going to step into a didactic moment here, mental moment. So when I'm looking at the centers, when I'm looking at a chart, and I look at all of what is white, what are all the white centers? Like, so there's 9 centers, right? A person's chart might have 4 centers defined, might have 7 centers defined, 6 centers defined, 3 centers defined, 8 centers defined. And so the undefined centers is the places that hold the greatest amount of conditioning. Doesn't mean they're not exactly that doesn't mean that the defined centers don't also hold conditioning, because that can be repressed out of us and it can also be amplified as a form of conditioning depending on multiple factors growing up. And the defined is looked at in part of the experimental component of these systems as part of what our consistent nature might provide, where the undefined side of things, the white centers, that's like where spirit moves through, right? That's our wisdom. That's where our connections with others are open to, like creating handshakes and relationships that change who we are for a moment in time. It's why our worlds are so much brighter and more expansive when we're around other people's, because we are different people energetically, aurically. When I'm by myself sitting here versus when I'm around other people, there's a distinct difference of energy influence that we can track inside of the mechanic layers, and to some degree the gene key layers, the soul group blueprinting layers of gene keys. And so when we're coming back and we're looking, so and for this ego study, I am playing with 2 factors in my brain. I am playing with the 4 gates and the channels, so the 8 gates of the will center. And I'm also looking at in Gene Keys, the core sphere, that's also the wound and vocation. It's lines. Okay, so it's lines 1st through 6. First line is repression, second line is denial, third is shame, fourth is rejection, fifth is guilt, and 6 is separation. And so you can look at your core wound to see where is the contribution on a deep level. And my goodness, when you start to look for it and you realize, like, go look in your gene key chart. If you're a person who does this, if you're drawn to this, wonderful. If you're simply here to hear me speak, wonderful. Ignore what things that I'm saying about the charts. You don't need the charts in order to do this kind of work. Some people really love it. It really helps. And I'm a geek about that. And that's partly why I weave all these things together. So if you are a geeking sort of person, lay out your gene key chart and your human design chart in front of you and look at your wound spheres line. Mine's 2, line 1. What's yours? Comments if you like. Love to hear from you. And then in your human design chart, what of those 8 gates around the will center do you have defined? And which ones do you have open? Remember, the open ones is where you're going to have the most conditioning, and it's the deepest conditioning that sets up the seat for the ego. And remember, our ego is not a bad thing, and it does express itself through these places. And so we get in order to take responsibility for a thing, becoming aware of it is one step. Taking responsibility for it is another. Communicating what and how we have done so is another. And then doing things with it out into the world, where we step out as our sovereign self and we do what we are here to do, which can take many, many shapes. Right? That is that path that is a simplified route from the touchstone aspect of things that moves from awareness to sovereignty, to communication, to agency. And so when we come at it from all of those places, we're doing it from that root side of things out. It's like coming into where that ego seat is and going, all right, where's that deep room inside myself where I have hidden everything? And then that expresses itself through my voice. That expresses itself through my G center. My direction and my love. That expresses itself through my drive and my motivation, my root. That expresses itself through my emotions and my ability to make decisions based on the value of whether or not something's going to be good for me. The solar plexus. I make decisions based on whether or not this tracks mentally. The Ajna. Looking at how that will center expresses itself through those other energy centers. There's 9 of them. The will center is one of them. So there's 8 different ways that it can express itself through that process. And so when you're looking at your chart and you're like, okay, so if I know the will center, and this is for the folks who have it undefined. Those of you who have it defined, this is a little bit different of a conversation. I'll get to that in just a moment. There's about 37-ish% of people who have a will center defined, and the other half is those who have it undefined. So 66, 67 some percent are undefined, are open solar plexus, right? Not needing to prove oneself. Don't need to rearrange the room. Let the room be and watch what comes through. You might find that sometimes you have a powerful ability to be one with absolutely what walks through that room at any point in given time, that room being your life, that room being your world, and the things that are being asked of you inside of each of those moments. For example, your partner asks you if you would handle this chore in the house, taking out the garbage or mopping the floors, and you go, yeah, babe, I got that. And then it comes right down to it and you forget. Life happens. And so the proving side of ourselves might have us be like, well, I forgot, and that's because I was busy doing this over here. And so we're busy trying to prove that we didn't try to like do it on purpose, or as opposed to simply the non-proving state of it would be, I'm sorry, babe, I forgot. I'll go do it right now, or I'll do it tomorrow. It doesn't need to embellish. It doesn't need to expound. It doesn't need to run away. It doesn't need to get defensive. It doesn't need to become controlling. It doesn't need to feel exhausted. And it may have to move through all of those things in order to come to the place of being able to be like, yeah, this is how it is. So for those who have an undefined or have a defined will center, I invite you to consider that you are here to live inside of okay, that room defined. Okay, got it. You were born with a room that's pre-set up. It's got like a gong on one side. It's got like a a stage over here. It's got all these places where there's this expression ability. And you're meant to use those things in the room. You're meant to, send out the gong call for the morning wake up. You're meant to, step onto that stage and be like, all right, so tonight I'm going to be throwing out my ponders and we're just going to have like a live conversation stage. And those who don't want it, you don't have to stay. It's quite okay. And it's about being who you are, which can be really scary. And inside that room, that's your room, and you get to decide who comes in and who doesn't come in. So the will center inside of oneself, that ego center in one side of oneself, is for you. It is also tribal. It is also for other. It is also to share in relationship and within community. And we get to first encounter it ourselves, right? That's what we can encounter when we go inside in an internal journey. We can discover our own internal young child, little. We can discover our internal judgy bitch. We can discover our internal masochist or sadist. We can determine our own inner nerd or geek or scientist, like, right? So they're not all of them. They're all archetypal ways of being. Carolyn Mace is a great one. Abraham Hicks. There's a few people who are really great folks to listen to help that brain and that mind identify places and parts and just touch on that ego side in a gentle, loving, and kind of like guiding it towards a different way. Especially maybe listen into some of their newer things. They've both been around for a really long time. And they both can have a deep support. Teal Swan also. I feel like I have a resonance with a lot of what they all speak about and directions that they come from. I don't, everybody has their own perspectives and nobody's going to have an agreement with everything 100% of the time. I simply am saying that I find valuable things that they speak about and medicine inside of their words and intent and the emotions that at least I feel that get evoked when I listen to them and when I see other people listen to them. Mel. All right. So that was playing with one half of the 4037 channel. So let's wrap through that because we've got 4 places to play in here. Right now I'm playing inside of that 4037 channel. Logistically wise, it's the mechanics, right? 4037. 40 is the mechanics of loneliness and determination. It is the determination to break free from the obligations in the community by being alone. So it's like I've done my thing. I've done what I'm here to do. I have made the food for the evening, and now I'm going to retire. I have chopped the wood, and we have had this thing, and now I'm going over here. All right, so it is that energy of going to be alone, self-determination, needing to, here to bring something and then go tend to self. Okay, where the other end of that channel, that 37, is friendship and loyalty. And so this is where it's about connecting in for the value of working and waiting for peace, creating harmony, the manifestation, the actuality of orderly existence. and loyal and supportive communities. And so those two pieces of aloneness and togetherness walk and weave together in this 4037. We can sometimes, if we're not aware that this is kind of like a flow in our world, we might resent one side or the other. We might have an issue with how things roll through. We might go, wait a minute, where am I? Am I supposed to go do a thing right now, or am I supposed to sit here and receive a thing? Right. So it's kind of like it's a weakness inside of our world where we can have a difficult time knowing where to receive and where to put out, or to penetrate out, to give outward, and dancing that pole shift back and forth until we find a place where we can come into equilibrium. Now remember, it's probably not a like, oh, one day it'll just happen. I mean, yes, and I'd like to say that can be a possibility. I'd like to also say that effort and contribution and intention can also play a big role in how we move forward. Many ways to walk, many ways to be. Okay. So now we're going to move from that 4037, which was that solar plexus, to the ego, right? So that is emotional energy going up into the will center. This is emotionally based ego conditioning. And so that's where we can become addicted to the feel of a good thing. It's where we can become resentful that we don't get to feel a good thing. It can feel a lot of different ways. And we can be in a lot of varieties of places with it. And so it's not an antidote, it's not a fix, because it's not, looking at it like we are broken is not helpful. Even though our brains tend to work in the binary of good and bad, right and wrong, this and that, yes and no, right? So when you find it happening, acknowledge it. Yep, this is not a thing that is necessarily going to help me to continue doing this. And it is an understandable thing of how we got here. And we want something different, right? There's three things I just stacked right there. Acceptance of the isness, knowing where we want to be, and the process of how we're going to get there. Okay, now we might be able to move out of things so long as we value each one of those components. When we don't value each of those pieces, that ego inside of ourselves says, I'm not giving up. I'm not surrendering. I need to be heard. And that is part of, it's like, when I think about it from a perspective of, imagine all of us as spirit beings that have broken into all these fractal pieces and come down to earth and come into side of this being that's born as a child and grows up through all these experiences, knowing that it's here for a reason and a purpose, and yet it sits inside of a body where it forgets. That can make total sense to me. Makes sense why deja vu makes you go, oh, wow, this feels like a thing I've remembered before. Yeah, maybe this time, maybe another time, maybe portals and timelines and galaxies. And all of a sudden, the things that seem inconceivable are no longer as improbable. And so the brain starts to go, oh, maybe I don't know it all. Yay! That's wonderful. Because even those of us with defined consciousness and defined heads, we do not know it all. In fact, it can be almost more dangerous for us who think we know it, because that is a reason why that ego side of things remains stuck in ways that are unhealthy for us. And so we end up either disregarding life and not showing up for it fully, or we work with it so hard that we bang our head into it and we hurt ourselves because we've just tried to force ourselves through life in a way that isn't aligned for us. No. Okay. I'd like to invite us to move to the energy that revolves around the ego that comes from the spleen. So this is the energy of intuition, of body sensorial, safe, not safe. How are we going to do this? Where are we going? This is that energy of coming together and then figuring out what's happening with it. What are we doing with this? Okay, so it's the energy of the 26, the trickster and tactics, and the energy of the 44, which is energy and collaboration and greeter and coming to meet. So collects all the energy, brings it all around, and goes, what are we going to do with this? That's kind of the energy of the whole of the gate. And so when we're looking at it by itself, okay, we have pride on one hand and we have interference on the other. We have the pride of the 26 and we have the interference of the 44. Pride is wielding the iron will. And it can be manipulative and boastful. It can be a victim of egoic or lack of grit, right? Boast big about itself, or it can be kind of so cowardly that it just kind of like snipes from the corner. It's a dilemma of lack that is behind pride, not enoughness. It's a whole different perspective when I consider it in some ways from the views of patriarchy, where that pride and that arrogance that thinks it can take everyone else's money may have a root inside of lack for itself. And it makes me go, oh, they're like little kids, not learned how to play with their and share their toys. Okay, got it. Well, that helps me to step away a little bit from the anger and the reactionary side of things that would simply keep the aspect of it in motion. You want to put a thing to rest, you want to end a thing, don't give it any energy. Give it nothing in yourself, outside of yourself. Energy is energy. Energy is energy. Good, bad, right, wrong. Energy doesn't know good, bad, right, wrong. It doesn't know black, white, yes, no. It doesn't know I don't want this, I want this. It doesn't know that. That means something. That means when you make wishes, if you wish for a thing that is based in a negative, if you wish for a thing that's based in a don't or a won't or a can't, energy doesn't know that. And so you've asked for the thing that you don't want. I'm scared of, I don't want this thing. Please, blah, 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 send me someone who's not like. They send you per someone who is like because you are focused on. And it's not a because. We entry points. We do not experience the things we experience because we're horrible people, because something's wrong with us. The natural disasters that happen do not happen because we have done something. Seriously. And when we can look at results and consequences of things that have happened, we can have some understandings in some ways that can help us to shape ourselves and how we govern ourselves, how we agree to step in and govern ourselves, i.e., making new ways and new flows in society and culture as we grow and evolve. We can learn from past, right? So I was watching a video at one point, and it was this person who was like, I growing up was such a person who was so literal that, if someone said, be yourself, don't follow other people, I was then myself so much that I never masked, that I never did anything that was like kind of socially acceptable, and it sort of wreaked havoc wherever they went because society could not accept them. And so then they learned, oh, well, don't be that extreme. Follow the crowd like this, but then not like this, but then like this, and then not like this. And then all of a sudden they were like in this little tiny box and they didn't like know who they were anymore. We need to break out of that. And we need to break out of that in the kinds of ways that line us up with our soul, with our calling, that invites us to go into whatever it is that we are here to do. I moved from being a paramedic and a firefighter and then a real estate agent after I got injured into living on a mountainside without a vehicle for 8 years, growing medicines and foods and making and teaching classes and supporting communities and traveling to events and being of a support in these times with different kinds of projects that people invite me to. That's how I follow my calling. I was called out of one and into another. It was terrifying in a lot of ways. How am I going to survive without a paycheck, without knowing exactly how I'm going to live? I was called into not paying attention to that, following so deeply what my calling is, what lights me up inside, right? My hallmark of my calling is what lights me up inside. What lights me up in a way that brings fruitfulness into the world, that brings lightness and brightness, even if that means I'm bringing it by dark means. Sometimes our very darkness can bring lightness into the world, right? Our battle-born isness, the things that we have had to become in order to survive, to get where we are, to be able to do this next thing. I call that battle-born. It shortens it up and sums it up and keeps some of the intensity that comes with it, because our cells don't unlearn those things. Just like our body holds our body keeps the score, that book, wonderful book. Our body keeps the score in the ways that we've also evolved into being in ways that may or that can always be helpful in some way. It's a matter of application of how. And our own patience and willingness and our ability to surrender into our own journey and respect that our journey in connection with others depends on others as well. Ego doesn't really like that, right? In stepping back into this 26 and 44, the trickster side of the 26 is always going to be like, how can I make a deal here? Well, the thing is if you, so like I have the 26 and I said, all right, trickster, how can I make sure that I can use tactics in a way that benefits multiple things? So I want to win, win, win. I want to win for myself, a win for the other, and win for something greater than us that is pointing in a helpful direction. So now I have some meters and parameters for that isness inside of myself that's like, so we're gonna talk shop. We're gonna make a deal here, right? Put it to use for good, for value, for how it can be a thing that closes deals and targets and has tactical control over memories, over strength, over its ability to influence and share with others. Right? My goal here today is both to show you what happens in Alchemy of the Season School. What is it like to sit inside of a class? I am neurodiverse as hell. I am all over the place. I have a trackable method by which I go all over the place for a purpose, on a mission, because of. And I try my best to start out that way. It gives people an exposure for how it is that I am and what is it they might experience then wanting and needing membership, community support for and with. It's also a free gift to the community here because we are just stepping out of these eclipse times. And so Spirit and myself went, all right, let's play with offering these inner cartography quests twice a year, right after the eclipse season. So integration period, you spend all this time, go listen to astrology videos. There is so much out there on the astrology of the transits involving around these major ecliptic times that happen every spring and every fall in these same time parameters. September, October, and March and April are these deeply pivotal ecliptic times. You know, sometimes we see it overhead in the stars and the sun, and sometimes we don't because it's happening on the other side of the planet. It's still happening. And for some people, that's not their medicine. And that's cool, right? A quarter or less of what I do has to do with things that revolve around things that are happening with astrological weather. There's many components of what's involved. This happens to be the corner and the quadrant for these intercartographical explorations. Intercartographical explorations. There we go. I like that one. Oh, right. So back to this 2644. 44's energy is the energy of interference. It is the energy that can be both mistrustful and misjudging. It's a dilemma of hierarchy, like who's where. It can accidentally and or on purpose, meaning consciously or unconsciously, put and keep people in lower places of being. Meaning hierarchy says, you're down there and I'm up here, or I'm down here and you're up there, right? So it puts itself as less than or greater than. That's kind of what hierarchy does. Now, I've also been playing for years with using hierarchy for safety. So like, this is your chain of command for conversation, right? You find something that's out of place or, you know, dangerous, you tell the person who supports and works with 5 people who, and those people are going, that person's going to tell this person, is going to tell more people, and this person's going to tell more people, and just in a couple ways of telling people, we have everything dispersed, right? And they're going to determine as we go who needs to be activated, because maybe not everybody needs to show up for a fire alarm, right? We might want them to all show up if there's a structure fire, but not if there's a chimney fire. And so we start off with a 1 call bell alarm and we move it up from there, right? So rather than getting in the way of a process, which is kind of what interference does, the gift of the 44 is teamwork, right? So it's like about bodies and bloodlines. Who's here to do what? What you called to do? Oh, you the one who sets off the bells and the alarms and says, this is what's being called to do. I'm not going to interfere with the process. I'm going to tune into the process. The state of 44 is also that energy on a mechanical level of that gathering, of coming to meet, right? It's based in that instinctive awareness that impartially supports successful cooperation, right? So it says, hey, can we get along? We can do this. We got this. We can figure this out. When it's not in that place of being able to, then that's when it becomes interfering, right? And so those 2 pieces and parts run together inside of working with that gate 26. So both of them are coming off of that splenic energy. They're both the energy of how to influence and move forward in helpful ways. It's being able to pick up the scent of a true ally. It's learning to listen to your own loving intention rather than being stuck in pride. Look for your intention. All right, 2644. All right, let us play with 5125. 5125. Shock and courage and the love of spirit. It is shock and the resulting need for courage that allows spirit and its love and the love of spirit to come through like threading a needle. Shock and courage is that movement from the G center to the will center. And they're kind of like right across from each other, right? And so this is the travel and the communication between the 2 aspects of our heart. We have our hidden heart and we have our like out front heart, right? We have the heart that loves ourselves. We have the heart that loves others and relates outwardly. And inside that love, right, we have love as unconditional love. It's raw form. It's pure form. It has no conditions. It's not even really based on how you will treat me. That's a decision point that happens in a different place of the body system. It simply loves. You know, it's like I look outside and I love what I see, whether it's a snowy day, a fall day, a spring day, a gorgeous summer day, a rainy day, a gray day, a horrible stormy day, a lightly peaceful, warm day. They're all beautiful. Seeing them all as beautiful is a piece of this process of being at home with loving what you see, loving it from that G center. G center is love and direction for yourself. I think of G center as our lighthouse. I think of the will center as how we express and take out into the world. It's our external love. They're all places also where our ego can be, right? I do this because I love you. I couldn't possibly have meant it that way. I meant it this way because I know I love you here. Love can, as beautiful as love can be, love can also be a thing that we use to hide behind. And it can also be a thing that we allow to blind us, and or that simply blinds us because we're not even aware that we are blinded yet. We don't necessarily have control over someone else manipulating us into blindness. So that's the thing we can't control. And now we're starting to edge into that conversation around control, which is where well, it's one of the ways we're heading to. That's gate 21, is the shadow of control and dominance. Right? That's the ego to the throat. That is the ego manifestation of, how am I going to deal with this? We cannot control things that are outside of ourselves. I mean, we can try, and we'll get away with it insofar as other people allow us to control their world, which means they're getting something out of it. It's kind of, well, it's really what unhealthy relationships are, what codependent relationships are, is where something unhealthy is happening and the other person is continuing to let it because either they don't see it, they are getting something from it, right? Yeah, there's a lot of pieces and parts to how we end up in unhealthy dynamics for ourselves. And if it's unhealthy for us, it's probably unhealthy all around. Wow. All right. Shock and courage, agitation, anxiety, constriction training. So these are places where, when we look at where are we, I'm going to put out some spectrums for you. Cowardly, hostile, ignorant, cold. Ignorant and cold is part of the constriction. We can be ignorant by not knowing that we're even feeling constriction. I'm not like that. I'm not overly serious. She said she couldn't figure out how to smile. There's so much nuance to the things that we are thinking of, right? So let me run this thought past you for a moment. In each person, there are all these different ways of receiving information, right? Okay, so follow me here for a second, if you will. We hear a thing, right? And in that hearing, it travels up into our brain, and we make a sense of it. Like, what is meant by that thing? And then in that meant of that thing, this is what this means. We go, this is how I feel about it. This is my interpretation of it. And then in this interpretation of it, it's like, where have I had an experience with it? And then from where we've had an experience of it, now we're looking for how to be able to find words for how to describe the thing. And then there's what actually comes out of our mouth. So that's like, what, 6 places between the receiving of information, the processing of it, and then the formation of a response back. And so in one person alone, there's how many places to lose track of where you are in a conversation? That's so many threads of where things are moving to. And so being able to be one with the fact that we're always going through shock, we're always being poofed. And it's not comfortable. Sometimes it can be very hard. And if we can be on top of the ball, as opposed to like feeling the ball's falling on us, we can get up on that ball and be like, okay, all right, where are we going here? And we can find people who are supportive of that process, that they get something out of being around you, and you get something out of being around them, and you're both happy to agree to be as kind to each other as you possibly can be, while always taking really good care of yourself, right? So yeah, that's that energy of balancing and playing with where that 51-25 energy is, right? That agitation and that constriction. Where are we as far as astrology goes? So 51 is an Aries energy, and 25 is Pisces, right? So we got Aries and Pisces. They are opposite ends of the extreme. Aries starts off the zodiac, and Pisces ends it. Right? Aries is the youngest energy. Pisces is the oldest energy. Aries is fire. Pisces is water. And so we have meeting of fire and water, oldest and youngest, meeting across the lines of the 2 heart centers. So that is a place where our ego can step in and go, no. I hurt too much. You got to respect my feelings. We get to respect our feelings. Can also be, hey, this is what I think is right. this is the way, this is the truth, as how I see it. And it can press and force that on others. It can also not take a stance at all, right? In Aries that doesn't stand up for itself, Aries can be in houses of detriments. Aries can be in places where it's really difficult for Aries to enact itself. It's part of the reason why I've really enjoyed lens stacking with these nuances of conversations inside of all these systems, because there's such a deep conversation to be had around why, where, how, what's involved when a child and a parent have a run-in. And so take a 25-year-old person and their parent. I'm not even going to call it child and parent at this point. We're going to say there's an older and a younger, and this one beget this one, so that can feel like there's an entitlement between one and the other. And yet the child, this 25-year-old, is its own being, right? And yet the relationship between the two can be so tenuous. The breakaway of the child into its adult form, the holding on, the territoriality or not of the one that beget, right? Some have a hard time stepping up for responsibility. Some have a hard time letting go of responsibility, letting go of what they think like they own, right? So we have so many different ways that we can show up and be and present, right? And so in this conversation of deconditioning the ego, exploring the conditioning of, the deconditioning process starts to happen as soon as we enter any triggered moment and go, hold on here. What could be happening under the surface? What could be something that I do not yet understand that could be happening that I could lean into and go, what's behind that door? What's behind that thought? What's behind that behavior? Why did I become like that? Because it gives us that pause and that a moment to choose something different, to recognize something different. Mm-hmm. All right, let's step into this last one over here. Check these comments also. Which sphere is the wound sphere? The wound sphere is the core sphere. It's the one right between, it's between your Venus and the Pearl sequence. Wonderful to hear. Wow. Taking a peek at the comments. Okay. Last one we're going into is 21 and 45. This is an intense conversation. This conversation. All right. We're gonna need to cool off a little here. Whew. This conversation is all about where our resources are coming, going, where our levels of influence are big pieces and parts of the conversation that we might be missing. This is the energy of 21 and the 45. We have the king and the queen with the 45, and we have the treasurer with the 21. And so there's two different sets of energies here. There's accumulation energy, and there is authority-based energy. One is dealing with influence, the king and the queen. Okay, so let's see what I'm going to do this here. I'm going to put 45 accumulation into my left hand. Energy in, left, king and queen, accumulation. This is gathering together. This is saying, come, beloveds, let us gather. It is time to feast. It is time to be one with and to hold in our hand our accomplishments for the year. It is to bring things together. It's that 45 energy. And on this side is the treasurer. This is authority. This is the management of resources and materialistic things that happen because we choose to come together and we pool our resources. And this is the control of it. Right? This is the energy of the 2145. And this is huge because this is, without this, we don't have healthy, sustainable communities. We do not have healthy, sustainable bank accounts and personal resources. We don't have governments and ways of being inside the existing cities and towns and ways of structure that can be in a helpful way. When these energies are out of balance, we have control and dominance. We're being manipulated. We're controlled for another agenda. When this management of resources and this ability to influence, the ability to call it as it is, right? The influence that happens by things not being discussed in a equitable way inside of social media, things being shut down and not talked about or twisted or whatnot. That lack of influence or the corruptibility that exists inside of influence is that one piece that I'm talking about here. This energy of that 45. And over here, we're talking about the treasurer. We're talking about authority. We're talking about physical resources. We're talking about the things that are vital for our ability to be sustainable. This might be talking about housing, clean water, food, the ability to be dry and warm, right? And when those two things, and looking at them as two separate things, here we're studying them as two separate gates, one from the ego center and one to the throat. This energy of that 21, the treasurer, the authority side of things, the management of resources is that throat energy. That energy of the 45, accumulation, is coming from that will center. So how we speak about what we have, tribal ego. Okay, let's look a little bit at control, dominance. These are dilemmas of, we've got control and dominance. Dominance, control. We have insecurity and we have discipline. These are dilemmas. So the dilemma of insecurity, am I going to be able to hold on and keep that which I have gathered? Over here, we have this discipline, this dilemma of discipline. Am I disciplined enough to manage these resources well? Do I tend to just go out and spend a lot of money? Do I not get the bills paid on time? Right? So I'm trying to find practical ways of applying these pieces, how do I tend the resources that I have? Do I put things away before it rains outside? Do I oil and take care of my equipment well? Do I manage my world and the influences that I have in a helpful, useful way? Or do I leave it to everybody else to do? Or am I controlling about how it has to get done, which are like repressive, reactive sides of this 21? And the 45s, is this too timid? Let's start at the dilemma of insecurity. Is it insecure that's going to be able to hold on to it? Does it have a perspective that there's never going to be enough? Poverty consciousness. It's never going to be enough. I don't have enough. My parents never had enough. There's not enough in the world. It's being focused on not enoughness. That's the dilemma, right? And that gives us that dilemma, the dilemma is insecurity about that, and the dilemma is the being so poverty conscious. And so that if we're looking for the shift of what that one is, shifted from poverty conscious to abundance consciousness. Look around it and simply turn it around. Look at how much beauty there is in the world. Look at how much abundance there is in the world. Like shitty things are happening to you. You're having an abundance of opportunities to grow. There's an abundance. Now you might go, oh yeah, well, that's just stupid. Well, I mean, so is staring poverty in the face and looking at it only like that's the only thing that can ever exist. Like, what's a matter of perspective? You want to feel different about things? You might start with how you think about a thing. And so when we get to in this 45 victim of poverty consciousness, we look at it from a repressive, reactive state of timid and pompous. And so it can either be very quiet and timid about it, like it's quiet about its poverty consciousness. It doesn't really talk about it. It kind of quietly believes that there's nothing good in the world for it. Or it can be very loud about it. The world's done me wrong. I should have been born like this. I should be treated like this, right? There's this pompousness that can happen when we feel that we have a right to how we feel about a thing. And that energy really wants to move into synergy, right? We're moving from hierarchy to heterarchy. And so it's like, all right, yes, it is difficult right now to see ways of getting out of this position. And so let's look at the multitude of ways that we can and the interconnectedness of how they could flow rather than only this to this to this to this. Rather, let's put this thing in the middle and let's branch it off and have each of those connected to themselves. Right? And so we change our focus from one way of being into a multiplistic way of being while we are still deeply ourselves. It's always going to start with yourself, and then it's always going to move to in relationship. And that's a movement you can see in the touchstone matrix, another one of the matrix I play with, as it moves across the board between self to in relationship. So it's always moving across the board this way. That's that breath. The flow of the ocean wave is always moving across the matrix in this kind of way. And there's always a coming back to the beginning and again when it's time to learn another layer for self. Because we're first here for this. We're first here to be what we're here to bring. And then it's the connection out, which brings us back to ourself, which brings us to what we're here to bring, which brings us into connection. You see that rhythm and that flow. And I feel like we see that in how we ebb and flow with relationships, how we ebb and flow with our loyalties and our connections and our need for alone time. I feel like we do that inside of our material resources and how we gather things together and then how we disseminate and see and choose how they are distributed and created. Recently I'm moving up in the LTD side of the nonprofit side in the business where it's like creating of the bylaws and movement towards federal status and getting all of those ducks lined up and run. It's a lot about like, how are we going to operate? How are we going to make decisions? Who gets told about the need to make decisions? How do we come together and operate under those practices and protocols, and the fact that we can grow as we go, which means that we can create living documents that live in a certain way this way as we're growing and living ourselves into new iterations of a thing. It's a little bit like growing in ourselves as humans and being able to evolve and change as we go. And the ego is excited about growth and change. The part of ourselves that protects us at all costs can sometimes get a little overly protective and go, well, but I can't let that go. That's necessary for our survival. And it doesn't mean to do what it does. And it's important that we see what it does and that we get to allow it to grow with us and be at one with the process as we move along. And sometimes that can take its time. And that time is that self-care that we give to ourselves to allow that process to be. It's a lifetime of living and working, living and loving and dying and growing and changing and being. Now. Oh, yeah. Come back here for a moment. I feel like we have moved well through everything. And I'm seeing what folks are saying here in the comments. Taurus between head and heart. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Open will center, define G center. Yep. Yeah, I have a similar layout as well. 5125, open will center and define G center. All activated gates. My 25 is activated. Conscious channel. 25 conscious channel. Oh, the lever of the spirit, right. Oh, that's beautiful. That 25 gate I believe it's that 25 gate that exists in all creatures. So like all creatures, even rocks, inanimate objects have gate 25, the lover of the spirit. So it's like it's love of being itself in a sense. Uh 25 energy, naturalness, simply being itself, the innocent disposition that manifests itself perfectly in its naturalness. A rock does that very well. It's one of the reasons why I love rocks. I have rocks that exist all over my place. Their presence, their isness, their I am this thing being here is a wonderful energy. I have them sitting around my computer. They help keep things a little more stable. That's good stuff. Yeah. I feel like that 25 energy, Stephine, I feel like I see that a lot when you dance, especially when you're out around your fire in your fairy gardens. That energy, that self of being, that self that's expressing your own personal direction, that energy of, moving that energy that's up in the body, moving it on out through movement and swirling and dancing and being and expressions and movement. When that's some people be like, oh, that's my autistic expression, and it's my hand flapping and it's my movements, or it's my little quiet things that I do, and twirling with my hairs, or my like little fidgets of things, or I don't have any masking things, I don't do anything. Meanwhile, they're like stiff as a poker. That energy of the love of the spirit, that naturalness, that isness of just being, it's truly a beautiful thing. And I think not everybody necessarily will understand everybody else's. We're not necessarily meant to love the smell of every flower, and I don't think it's any business of the flower. I don't think the flower cares whether or not I think it smells good. It's its flower. And I think that's one of our most important takeaways that we can do in this process, is to go, where is it my business and where isn't it? And where's my responsibility? And I love the fact that one of our responsibilities is to show up in life and dance, to be at one with our naturalness, to be at one with the beauty of whatever it is that can flow through us in a moment. Have it be authentic, have it be deeply who you are, right? That's showing so much the facets of what we are. And the facets of what we are is the totality of what we are, not any one single moment or single one level of expression. So I hope that you have the opportunity to take away something of value for yourself in this time. And I invite deep self-care as you go through this process, writing or journaling, even a sentence or two, and, putting a date with it, giving yourself an orientation of, when was this that I had this thought? What if I might invite you to write something down, it would be inviting you to write down a thought that you felt challenged you, or one that you deeply resonated with. It's like, yeah, I need to remember that about myself. I do that, and that's a good thing. Or I do that, and I want to keep an eye on that, because that could get out of hand, or that could go many different ways. I want to know what I'm doing when I'm thinking like that. Being inquisitive and asking ourselves questions is a really great way to be able to peer down a really dark hallway and be curious about what's at the other end, rather than being defensive because we're not sure what we might find. Yeah. I invite lots of water drinking. I invite some good food with some good nourishments. We need nourishments from lots of different places. And if we're not necessarily very great at getting good nourishment, then having a good multivitamin here and there, maybe not consistently all the time, can be a really great thing to do when we're integrating new and deep information. Processing with a friend. I'd also be careful about overly processing, because sometimes we can overly share a thing that still needs its time to percolate quietly inside of our being. Sometimes I have found my most quietly expansive growth moments happen by myself, when I am thinking and being with myself, and I am listening to spirit's intuition in my ear, not someone else's intuition about my life. They don't live my life. Only I live my life. Only you live your life. So there can be a deep value in speaking with others. There can also be a deep value in listening to one's own advice, one's own wisdoms and spirits, because we as humans do not have all the truths. The spirits and the stories that exist in nature and life around us, when we are quiet enough to listen to them, can give us so much, can give us so much deep value if we can allow ourselves to take it in and receive it in a good way. Wow. All right, beautifuls. It is 2:22, and I think I am going to wrap this up here. And I look forward to questions or comments that you may have from this time here together. Uh, the Facebook intercartography group is a great place to have these conversations, and so is the Alchemy of the Seasons group. If you'd like to know more about the things that we do, I invite you to check out AOTSS at mountainwomedicine.com. There'll be a link down in the descriptions as well. And like and follow this channel for more of these kinds of explorations. I plan on figuring out ways to do this about twice a year, and it'll become a little fancier over time, I think, because of how algorithms and things want to work. And for right now, I've been very pleased to come to you from the center of my workspace and to share and spend this time with you. And I hope that your afternoon goes well and that you take whatever is for your soul and for your evolution from this conversation here, and that you go out and seed it into the world, into whatever it is that you go and you create next. And I look forward to seeing what happens from that. Until soon, beautifuls.